All right, chat. 10 brutal wanted gang members versus court orders. Okay. Here we go. Fall the kick.
Tell you, I've been a cop for almost 36 years now. That was one of the worst things I've ever seen.
They kill my son. They kill a baby. They kill a 15 years old. They did not kill a man, a gang member or not. They kill a good boy.
Across the world, crimes are committed every day. Some are minor, but on the other hand, some are horrifying and heinous. Gang-related crimes are especially brutal. Many of these heinous crimes lead to their perpetrators becoming targets of major police manhunts.
Okay.
Today, we're taking a look at the top 10 most hunted gang members, their crimes, and also their reactions to being sentenced in court. From the Rollin 30s Crips to the crime syndicates of South Africa.
Crime syndicates of South Africa?
We're taking a look at the top 10 most hunted gang members, their crimes, and also their reactions to being sentenced in court. From the Rollin 30s Crips to the crime syndicates of South Africa. There's no shortage of evil in this world, so what happens when these criminals finally face justice in court? Let's find out. Number 1. Rollin 30s Crip Street Gang. Roanoke. First up, we have the Rollin 30s Crip Street Gang. In Roanoke, 3 members of this gang committed a horrifying crime. These 3 men were Sean Denzel Garrett, Trayvon Raycron Casey, and DeMonte Rashad Mack. After a string of smaller but still violent crimes, they ultimately crossed a line and committed murder. Shortly after, these men were arrested, both for the murder as well as their other crimes, including narcotics trafficking, extortion, and other criminal activities. During the trial, Garrett spilled the beans on their nefarious act. Garrett admitted he, Casey, Mack, and others conspired to conduct a pattern of racketeering activity, including multiple threats and acts of violence. Specifically, Garrett ordered Nicholas Lee, a 17-year-old, to kill another gang member identified as DF to atone for his violations and perceived disloyalty to the gang. In the early morning hours of June 15, 2017, Casey drove Lee to pick up DF. The rest of the gang followed them to a nearby Roanoke apartment complex.
Homie put Vaughn in this shit. That's funny as that.
After arriving, everyone except Levacy got out of their vehicles while DF ran away and hid. DF escaped because Lee warned him that while DF ran away
Homie just
and hid.
Tapped the homie on the wheelchair.
DF escaped because Lee warned him that he was in danger. After DF escaped, Lee refused to hand over his gun to Casey, but Mack pointed his gun at Lee and told him to do so. Lee gave Casey his gun and then fled, but it was too late. They shot him twice in the back, killing him. Garrett, also known as Harlan Dank 31, pled guilty to 1 count of racketeering conspiracy, as well as conspiracy to commit murder. He received a sentence of 37 years in prison. Casey and Mack were charged with similar crimes, receiving 40 years and 36 years in prison, respectively.
Okay.
During a press conference, Daryl Lee, the father of the murdered boy...
Why so specific, though? Like, why is it like 36 years and 40 years? Like... Or like, didn't someone get sentenced to like 105 years or some shit? Or, you know, not, I don't know, that specific, obviously, but like, you know, something that's just like not realistic.
Spoke about needing to combat gang violence in Roanoke. We can spend all the money we want to, but until we get to the core issue of teaching kids what's right and wrong at home, the problem will continue. Number 2, Montana Baronet.
Okay.
Second on the list is the trial of Montana Baronet, a member of the vicious gang known as Train to Go, based out of West Baltimore. Before his capture, Baronet was a notorious gang member in the area. Baronet's involvement in the gang's criminal activities date back to when he was just 13 years old. Baronet was so notorious that the Baltimore police labeled him the city.
What did he do?
Right and wrong at home. The problem will continue. Second on the list is the trial of Montana Baronet, a member of the vicious gang known as Train to Go, based out of West Baltimore. Before his capture, Baronet was a notorious gang member in the area. Baronet's involvement in the gang's criminal activities date back to when he was just 13 years old. Baronet was so notorious that the Baltimore police labeled him the city's #1 triggerman. During his time at large, he dabbled in multiple crimes. This includes illegal substance trafficking and also violence. Baronet also committed several brutal murders, including the killing of Antonio Addison on the front steps of his grandmother's home.
That's fucked.
The mother of one victim said, "Montana Baronet is the devil's child. Nobody can be that evil. To lose your son is the worst pain you can ever feel." Fortunately, law enforcement finally ensnared him, but only 10 years after his reign of terror began. At 23, Baronet sat in court faced with very heavy charges. He was staring down the barrel of 2 life sentences, having been convicted of killing 6 people. His social media presented as evidence.
Six?
Further showcased.
Damn! Why?
But only 10 years after his reign of terror began. At 23, Baronet sat in court faced with very heavy charges. He was staring down the barrel of 2 life sentences, having been
2 life sentences?
convicted of killing 6 people.
What the fuck? But what the fuck?
His social media, presented as evidence, further showcased violent tendencies. In one Facebook post, Baronet said, "A few haters. I will take all of your lives if I could." And even in court, this menace was unrepentant. During the trial, he attempted to intimidate witnesses, and several U.S. Marshals were assaulted while bringing in witnesses. Many witnesses were also afraid to testify for fear of their safety. Despite his lawyer claiming that his client had a difficult life and was a victim of circumstance, the judge wasn't swayed, firing back that Baronet's actions were his own choices and that he was a danger to society. Judging by the criminal's lack of remorse, the judge was right. Number 3, Aiden Fucci. Next, we have the youngest criminal to be sentenced on this list. Meet Aiden Fucci, a boy barely 14. Despite his tender age, he stood in court accused of murder.
No way he got... I know he didn't get life. No.
Fact that Baronet's lack of remorse, the judge was right. Number 3, Aiden Fucci. Next, we have the youngest criminal to be sentenced on this list. Meet Aiden Fucci, a boy barely 14. Despite his tender age, he stood in court accused of murder. This trial sparked much debate, but why? Because Fucci had committed one of the most heinous crimes in Florida history. On May 9th, 2021, he took the life of his 13-year-old classmate Tristan Bailey. Fucci assaulted
I think I heard about this.
and then left her body in the woods. The life of his 13-year-old classmate Tristan Bailey. Fucci assaulted her and then left her body in the woods near their home in St. Johns County. Needless to say, it was a senseless, shocking act that sent their community reeling. Many wondered how a young boy could commit an act so brutal. But the seeds of Fucci's violent crime had been planted years before that. He came from a troubled background. According to reports, Fucci had a history of mental health issues as well as violent outbursts.
Yeah, because that's not fucking normal. That's not normal. The average 13-year-old, the average fucking 14-year-old is not, killing somebody.
From a young age, he had gotten involved in alcohol and substance abuse. Due to his violent outbursts, Fucci was also suspended from school on several occasions. But despite all that, his parents were neglectful. They ignored the warning signs.
Basically, he got into some shit early on and decided to keep making bad decisions. And
refused to get him any help. Unfortunately, Fucci's condition became bad enough that he lashed out and murdered his classmate. From a young age, he had gotten involved in alcohol and substance abuse. Due to his violent outbursts, Fucci was also suspended from school on several occasions. But despite all that, his parents were neglectful. They ignored the warning signs and refused to get him any help. Unfortunately, Fucci's condition became bad enough that he lashed out and murdered his classmate. Despite his age, he was tried as an adult in court due to the severity of his crimes. There was no denying he killed the girl. The evidence was overwhelming. After deliberating the circumstances, the judge pronounced Fucci's sentence. Life in prison with no possibility of parole. Imagine that. An entire lifetime spent growing up.
Life in prison at 14 is crazy.
Life in prison with no possibility of parole. Imagine that.
Oh my gosh.
Entire lifetime spent growing up in jail without the chance of ever getting out. Still, many including the judge felt Aiden deserved it. In his testimony, Aiden had expressed that he killed the girl out of curiosity, seeking to discover what it felt like to take a life. This was despite knowing the potential consequences of his actions. Needless to say, his sentence was controversial, with many also opposing it. During the sentencing hearing, Fucci displayed little emotion, but other conflicting reports also state that he was visibly shaken by the verdict. Till today, his defense team is still attempting to appeal the decision, arguing that he was too young to understand the gravity of his actions. Number 4.
Cause someone go ask one of their 14-year-old or barely 14-year-old brothers or sisters or some shit if they think it's okay to go kill somebody. Now I understand this what this person was saying, and this is what I'm saying. The controversial part is like all the shit that's included, aka the mental health, bad upbringing, parental neglect, and shit. Oh my, yeah, something happened deep down for him to fucking do that shit. Like, cause like I said, go ask your average 14-year-old, barely 13, 14-year-old cousin, brother, friend, whatever the fuck. I don't know. You know what I mean? Like if they kill somebody, or if they think it's not if they kill, not if they would kill somebody. Ask them if they think it is okay.
4. George Gould Thomas.
Right or wrong.
While Fucci's
or right
sentence is
or
debatable,
wrong.
our next criminal is someone who definitely deserves his punishment. Meet George Gould Thomas from South Africa, a man serving 7 life sentences. Needless to say,
700, that's like 700 years.
he's never getting out alive.
No shit. The other homie wasn't getting out alive at 2 life sentences.
Thomas was once a notorious gangster. He was born in 1963 and grew up in Cape Town's notorious Cape Flats. The Cape Flats were a hotbed of gang activity and violence, which influenced Thomas down his path in life. He eventually joined the 28S gang, which was known for its brutal tactics and control of the narcotics trade in the area. In his teens, Thomas was initiated into the 28S gang and began his criminal career. He became one of the gang's most feared members, rising through the ranks over the years. Thomas was involved in numerous violent crimes, including murders, drug trafficking, and extortion. But his reign of terror came to an end in 2006 when he was arrested. In court, Thomas found himself slapped with over 50 charges. This included 7 counts of murder,
shit.
with one of the victims being a 6-month-old baby.
You
Thomas and 6 of his gang members received life sentences, while the others were jailed for between 12 and 25 years. Each murder
what the fuck the baby do?
charge brought with it a sentence of life imprisonment.
Cried
This
too damn
trial was a
loud?
significant one, signifying South Africa's tough stance on organized crime and gang activity. Before it, their criminal justice system had been perceived as inefficient and soft on criminals. Because of the trial's importance, the defendants had to be closely guarded throughout the process due to gang threats. Even the lawyers and law enforcement officers had threats made on their lives. Half of the people linked to this high-profile case were assassinated. As for George Gould Thomas, he was unrepentant throughout the trials. Eerily enough, the man never stopped smiling, and even after he was locked away, his evil deeds continued. Behind bars, Thomas was still able to orchestrate 4 murders using his influence and
Oh, be killed. Okay, wait, it was 7 murders, right? Was it 7 murders? Plus 4, that's 11.
connections in the criminal underworld.
He's killed fucking
There were more
11
than
people, that's
30,000
crazy.
calls made by him from his jail cell. This included orders to kill even more people, including witnesses.
Homie just didn't give a fuck.
Number 5.
Just
Lee
didn't
Rios.
care.
At number 5, we have Lee Rios. Lee Rios was a 25-year-old Latin Kings gang member. On February 23, 2018, he was sentenced by the Hampton Superior Court to life imprisonment without parole. This was due to his role in the cold-blooded
Fuck.
murder of 18-year-old Kenneth Lopez.
Oh, okay.
Kenneth Lopez
Oh, I thought that was the dude.
was a fellow
Never
member
mind.
of the same gang. In 2015, Rio decided to have him eliminated and began a meticulous
To have him eliminated.
murder of 18-year-old Kenneth Lopez. Kenneth Lopez was a fellow member of the same gang. In 2015, Rio decided to have him eliminated and began a meticulous plan. With the help of other members,
Crazy.
Rio lured Lopez from his house and shot him dead in the early hours of the morning on March 24th. Lopez's body was only found around 11 a.m. the following day. Afterward, Rios boasted about the murder on social media and to friends. This eventually led to his arrest. 8 other charges were also laid against Rios.
So I don't understand because so you know I feel like thinking ahead and just using logic, which it seems like and in a lot of these cases there isn't a whole bunch of logic because I feel like logic says, hey, if you kill somebody, you're gonna go to jail. You're probably not gonna get away with it, or you're probably gonna get caught eventually if you do get away with shit or with it. You know what I mean? I don't understand the logic. That's like not the logic. I don't understand like how someone could just like do that like and be okay with the consequences in the future. You know what I mean? Like or the potential consequences for that action, which is life in prison. You know what I mean? It's like, bruh, do you what? It's like, do you not think you're gonna get? Do you not think you're gonna have a bad life, like on purpose, damn near, like if you choose this shit, like that's I don't know, that's crazy to me, but yeah, I know there's a whole bunch of shit that goes into it, like mental health. Yeah, yeah.
Apart from murder, these charges were related to the possession of firearms. One of the charges involved him storing a large firearm in the close vicinity of children. During the trial, numerous witnesses came forward to testify that he had boasted about the murder. Many of these witnesses were members of his gang. Defense lawyer Mary Ann Stam argued that the only evidence against Rios was the testimonies of people equally guilty, with each seeking a lesser punishment for their crimes. She suggested the whole thing was a setup, a plot to take revenge from someone else in the gang. However, the jury did not find this conspiracy theory believable and decided to hand down a sentence mandated by the law. Throughout the trial, Rios showed little reaction and even less remorse. The jury ultimately found Rios guilty, citing his callous disregard for human life as a factor in the harsh sentence.
And then, and I want to say this too. It's like the disregard for his life too. It's like pretty much. It's like homie is okay with. I mean, I think it's pretty simple to like think about that. Like if I kill somebody, I'm probably going to get caught and go to prison for a long time, right?
Showed little reaction and even less remorse. The jury ultimately found Rios guilty, citing his callous disregard for human life as a factor in the harsh sentence.
Yeah, like it's damn near like disregard for your own life too, because it's like you don't give a fuck, like you just want to throw it down the drain. You know what I mean?
Afterward,
that's
Kenneth
crazy. I don't
Lopez's family was
understand that.
interviewed. They expressed their grief naturally.
I mean, but then again, another perspective may be I don't know. I mean, I'm not from that life, but another perspective may be it's literally like they have no hope to go have a good life. You know what I mean? Potentially, because it's like the bad shit is all they know, so they don't think about the potential of having a good life, or they don't think it's possible for them, so they go about that path because they think that either way they're not gonna have a good outcome anyway, so they just choose one or the other. Interesting.
His death had hit them hard, due to how unexpected it showed little reaction and even less remorse. The jury ultimately found Rios guilty, citing his callous disregard for human life as a factor in the harsh sentence. Afterward, Kenneth Lopez's family was interviewed. They expressed their grief naturally. His death had hit them hard, due to how unexpected it was. Even as Rios was taken away, Lopez's family could barely believe that Kenneth was no longer with them. Number 6. Abel Gallegos. Another gang member sentenced to life imprisonment for murder would be Abel Gallegos. Interestingly enough, his sentence is life in prison, plus 163 years, due
See, okay.
to how the legal system works.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Why? Why the specifics 163 years? It's like, homie, he's going to be dead if he's a grown ass adult. If he's 20 and you give him 80 years plus, he's probably not going to, survive. You know what I mean? It's like, I don't
Gallegos was
understand.
sentenced due to his involvement in the murder of Simone Duran. Two other individuals, Rene Francisco Rosales and Alonzo Quintana, were also found guilty on multiple counts for their involvement in this horrific crime.
Oh my god,
Their motivation
tattoo. You got that.
In this horrific crime. Their motivation for killing Duran was her whistleblowing. Duran was a witness to a prior murder and had identified Quintana in a lineup. This made her a target of Gallegos and his associates.
Gosh.
Putting his plan into motion, Gallegos approached Duran on social media. He suggested they meet up, along with
Approached him on
Rosales and others
social media.
at her house in Denver. It's unclear why she agreed when she knew he was a wanted murderer. On November 5th, 2018, Duran met them. She was then lured out by Gallegos, who left the house together with her and Rosales. Afterward, Rosales went home, leaving her alone with Gallegos for a while. Gallegos was able to convince Duran to follow him to a parking lot, where they met Quintana. The two men then viciously assaulted Duran before kidnapping her. Afterward, she was driven to a remote spot, where the attacks continued over 10 times. Eventually, when the men had enough, they set her on fire and left her to die. He knew he was a wanted murderer. On November 5th, 2018, Duran met them. She was then lured out by Gallegos, who left the house together with her and Rosales. Afterward, Rosales went home, leaving her alone with Gallegos for a while. Gallegos was able to convince Duran to follow him to a parking lot, where they met Quintana. The two men then viciously assaulted Duran before kidnapping her. Afterward, she was driven to a remote spot, where the attacks continued over 10 times. Eventually, when the men had enough, they set her on fire and left her to die. Needless to say, the evidence of their crimes left
What the fuck?
the judge horrified and disgusted.
Yes, like, why? Damn.
The premeditated nature of their crime and lack of remorse was obvious. Even as the evidence piled up against him, Gallegos continued to plead not guilty, stating he wasn't involved in the murder. He remained calm throughout, showing no emotion, not even when the police led him away to prison. Number 7. Gangster Disciples. At number 7, we have one of the most heinous crimes in recent Atlanta history, committed by a group of gang members when they murdered Christopher Dean. The group was made up of members of the Gangster Disciples street gang. These 3 members were named Christopher Lockett, Xavier Gibson, and Orlando Gibson. The Gangster Disciples were known to operate in the West End neighborhood and had been involved in numerous crimes. This includes drug dealing and even murder. In November 2016, Lockett invited Dean to the home of the Gibson brothers. Dean thought they were inviting him there for a friendly visit and possibly to sell him some drugs. But Lockett's true purpose was much more sinister. Lockett had discovered Dean was a police informant in California before moving to Atlanta. Because of this, he conspired with the gang, and they decided to make an example out of Dean. When Dean showed up, he was beaten with a steel chair and a crowbar. They then put Dean in their car and drove to a MARTA train station. There, they proceeded to attack him again with baseball bats. He was also sodomized using a rod-like object, and seminal fluid was found in his rectal cavity.
They had anal sex with him? What? Please don't tell me that's true.
As further investigation revealed. When they finally felt satisfied with their revenge, the men stuffed Dean's lifeless body in the car trunk and fled. For 30 days, nobody in the public realized the abandoned car contained a rotting body. When it was finally discovered, the sheer brutality of the attack horrified the community. An investigation and
Why'd they fuck him?
arrests soon followed. In 2018, after 2 years of trial, the perpetrators were convicted of the murder as well as other related felonies. They showed no remorse, even as Lockett was sentenced to life in prison with no parole, while the others also received life sentences.
What the fuck?
Even the judge couldn't hold back, stating how horrifying the injuries were and how this crime created waves of fear in the community. Number 8. Trinitarios. At number 8, we're taking a look at the tragic story of Lisandro Guzman Feliz, also known as Junior. Most of the previous victims were people who knew the criminals to some extent, but Feliz was caught up in gang affairs purely due to mistaken identity and paid for it with his life.
Damn, mistaken identity, so it was like a lookalike.
Purely due to mistaken identity and paid for it with his life. His killers were members of the Trinitarios gang in the Bronx, New York. The Trinitarios is a Dominican-American street gang. It was founded in the late 1980s in New York City. The gang has a presence in several states across the U.S., as well as in the Dominican Republic. Like other gangs, they often engage in inter-gang violence as well as other crimes. Guzman Feliz was attacked when he ran into some of the gang members in a store.
Oh my god.
Mistaking him for a member of a rival gang, they dragged him out of the store. All this was
Are you fucking
captured on a security
Oh
camera.
my god.
Outside, they continued assaulting him. Guzman Feliz tried escaping back into the store a few times to seek refuge but failed. In the end, he was beaten to death. In June 2019, 5 of the defendants were found guilty of first-degree murder. Their sentence was life in prison without parole. At the same time, the other 3 were convicted of lesser charges. It's clear that none of them were repentant, though, as they kept trying to shift the blame to each other throughout the trial. They also smiled and laughed throughout the trial. But the evidence was overwhelming. None of them could escape the law. The sentencing of the Trinitarios members brought some sense of justice to the family of Lisandro Guzman Feliz. Speaking to the press, his family described him as a bright and aspiring young man. His mother, Leandra Feliz, said, "My heart is destroyed, but I will not let his name die. I will make sure that Junior's death will not be in vain." Number 9. Victor Rodos. Number 9 is the trial of the gangster Victor Rodos.
Victor.
Rodos was an alleged member of the notorious MS-13 gang.
Okay.
In 2022, he was convicted for his role in the death of a 17-year-old teenager named Raymond Wood in Lynchburg, Virginia. MS-13, or the Salvatrucha, is one of the most violent and dangerous gangs in the world. With origins in Los Angeles in the 1980s, the gang has since spread across the United States, Central America, and Europe. They are notorious for their brutal tactics, such as murder, assault, and human trafficking. Members of the gang often mark their affiliation with tattoos. In America, they focus primarily on the East Coast. As for the crime Rodos committed, the courts ruled it to be premeditated murder. With the help of 5 other MS-13 gang members, Rodos kidnapped Wood. They assaulted him in the backseat of a car, choking him till he fell unconscious. When Wood was unconscious, the members attacked him with a 17-inch knife. Wood's body was then left on the roadside for passers-by to find later. Following their trial, the jury found the perpetrators guilty. Rodos, in particular, was found guilty of murder, abduction, and gang participation. For his crimes, he received a sentence of 55 years in prison. The defense argued that Rodos got caught up with the wrong person, alleged MS-13 gang member Jose Correas Ventura. But evidence revealed otherwise. The murder had been carefully planned for weeks. Rodos and Wood knew each other, and Rodos had been sending a series of text messages to Wood. These messages were to set up the fake drug deal that lured Wood to his death. The medical examiner testified that Wood died from knife injuries to his neck, torso, and hand. Rodos showed no reaction to his sentence, but his conviction was seen as a victory in the fight against MS-13. Number 10. Carpio Brothers. Lastly, we have the Carpio brothers, Anthony and Michael Stephen Carpio. These men were members of a street gang, like all the other murderers we've explored in this video, and were sentenced for their involvement in the fatal stabbing of 18-year-old Kevin Orellana. The stabbing occurred on the Cleveland High School campus in Rosada, California in 2013. At the time of the crime, Anthony Carpio was 18, and his older brother Michael was 20. The catalyst for Orellana's murder was a verbal altercation. At school, Orellana and his friends got into an argument with the Carpio brothers.
At school?
Unfortunately, this argument escalated to physical violence. Anthony then pulled out a knife and attacked Orellana multiple times with it. Orellana's friends tried to intervene, but Michael jumped in and held them back while his brother assaulted Orellana. In the end, Orellana's friends could only watch helplessly as Anthony stabbed him to death. During the subsequent trial, the brothers revealed that Orellana
at school is crazy.
was targeted simply because he was not a gang member. Attacking members of other gangs would have incurred their wrath, but Orellana's lack of affiliation made him an easy target. This was not their first time running into Orellana. The prosecution presented evidence in court, indicating that the brothers had made threats against Orellana in the past. They also had a known history of engaging in violent behavior. During the trial, a third person was also charged alongside them. Michel Pineda was sentenced to 2 years in county jail. He had pleaded guilty to 1 felony count of accessory to the crime. Michel had known of their harassment of Orellana, as well as the stabbing, but did nothing to stop it. The Carpio brothers were known to have gang ties, and their involvement in the crime was suspected to be gang-related. Unlike many of the other criminals we've seen, the Carpio brothers seemed to be actively remorseful over their deeds. At the sentencing hearing, the brothers expressed regret for their actions. They also apologized to Orellana's family, though of course it was too little, too late. We've taken a look at 10 cases of notorious gang members and criminals reacting to
Getting
their
stabbed to death is fucked.
sentencing.
Like, at least with a gun. I mean, I'm not saying either one of them is good, right? I'm not saying that at all. Getting shot with a gun, you get hit in the right way or in the wrong way. I don't know how to word that correctly, but y'all get what I'm saying. You're dead, right? Depends, right? A knife is literally brutal. You're being stabbed. That's fucked. Okay, yeah, that's fuck that shit. Okay. Anyways, yeah, good video. Shout out, homie. Yes, sir.